All right, welcome back, everybody. Super appreciate you being here on this Thursday afternoon, and I'm here with my longtime friend Stacia Sherman Garr. Stacia, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Al?
I'm doing real well. Thanks for joining us today. I am especially excited to be talking to you about this topic. You did a report on employee experience back in 2019. The world has changed considerably since then. Last week's announcement of Viva by Microsoft and how it's going to affect Glint, and that came a week after Workday acquired Pecons. So, Medallia's out there, Qualtrics is out there, ServiceNow, Perceptix, all these players are now squarely in this space called employee experience. So if you would just introduce a little bit about yourself, your firm, as well as what you have done recently on the employee experience topic.
Yeah, sure. So for those of you I don't know, hi, I'm Stacia Garr. I'm co-founder of RedThread Research. We're a human capital research and advisory firm, and more importantly, membership, which we launched back in December. And we focus on a range of things, including people analytics and HR technology, but also, as Al mentioned, employee experience and diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, learning and skills, and performance. So part of what we try to do is really to connect the dots across so many different areas that maybe in an organization are living a little bit in silos. And so we're trying to help kind of bring all of those things together. So as you mentioned, we did a study on employee experience in 2019, and it was kind of funny because Al, when I got the news that this was going to happen, because I was, fortunate enough to get a little bit of an advance warning, I went back and I said, okay, how am I going to structure this so people can think about it? And I said, well, I'll go back to our 2019 report. It's a little bit older, but it's only 18 months old. Maybe there'll be something there. And I looked at our model that we had in there that we put into this article about Viva. And I thought, this is it. Like it clarified for myself, okay. Many of our vendors have been focusing either on this one portion of employee experience in terms of kind of the day-to-day, or they've been focused on measurement. And what this solution is trying to do is to address all these other things that the others don't. And that's why it's a big deal. Because, as my job as an analyst is to be naturally skeptical. As we've talked about, a lot of vendors like to tell me a lot of things that are going to change the market. And part of my job is to go, meh. And so on this one, I did actually say, I think this will change the market. This is market moving. But, that is not my natural inclination.
So. All right. With Viva specifically, how did that either validate or, change your thinking? And not to say that it's going to be the end all, because having spoken with Microsoft representatives myself, it is a work in progress. That being said, they feel comfortable enough to, launch it. And employee experience, as we've discussed throughout the day, is not necessarily new. However, it's gaining some form and cohesion. So, again, just specifically with Microsoft Viva, how has that kind of framed your thinking here today at the beginning of 2021?
Yeah, so I think just to put a little bit more color, and maybe I should show that one slide because I think that might actually bring up the point. So let me go ahead and share that real fast for folks. So when we talk about employee experience, we talk about it in this way, being that it is a measurement of the collective perceptions of people. So on the right-hand side of what they observe, hear, encounter, and encounter can include feel. And it's a collective perceptions of their ongoing interactions with the organization. So relationships, work environment, organizational practices, and technology. We talk about it as being two types of perceptions that folks have. One around emotionally laden events. And we hear about this a lot when we talk about employee journeys with employee experience. So, your first day of work, your transition to a new management role, your first day coming back after leave, these moments that really mean something, that kind of thing. And then there's everyday exchanges. So, am I able to get the tech that I need, or do I have access to information, the benefits information, et cetera? That's also part of employee experience, but it's obviously a different level. By the way, part of the reason that employee experience has been such a big deal during the pandemic from our perception is that these emotionally laden events have been just so much more frequent because every day in so many ways has been emotionally laden. And so I think that's part of why employee experience has been such a big deal, is because the balance between these two has shifted. But anyway, so when we then took this definition and we compared it to and we looked at what this meant for vendors, we said, and this kind of clarifies my point of just a few minutes ago, vendors were either doing one of two things, and increasingly sometimes doing an overlap. But on the left-hand side, they were improving and measuring employees' tech experiences. So think about a lot of the technology that's been designed to, help somebody get access to their benefits information easier, or a lot of the chatbots, or all of these things that are kind of trying to make tech easier to do. And then it's also understanding, with like a Medallia, did that work? Was that good? And quickly cycling that information back in to understand how can we make that experience better. But a lot of it was kind of technology driven. And a lot of it, everyday exchanges, some emotionally laden events, like I said, when you're doing those journey maps around particular specific people and experiences. But like I said, a lot of tech driven. The other side on the orange is measuring employees' collective perceptions and engagement. And so that is a lot of the engagement providers that we have seen over the years, and understanding what people think, both from a kind of an annual perception and then also on a more regular basis through these frequent pulse surveys. What we've started to see is the two coming together to some extent. So if you think about like a Medallia, which you mentioned a few minutes ago, moving more towards employee engagement and measuring employee engagement, even though they might have been doing a lot of the work on the satisfaction with folks' journeys with the technology. So we've seen it coming together. But what Viva does, long way to get back to your original question, Al, is it is trying to bring in, or it says it's going to bring in a focus on relationships, work environment, and organizational practices into our understanding of what employee experience is more broadly. And then in theory, through things like Glint, you'll be able to continue to measure those things. So it really opens the aperture much bigger to what we can understand and measure. And also, if you're kind of getting yourself out of the people analytics world to the broader world of work, it's could be more of a single platform for employees to be doing all of their work through.
Well, you and I have been working together for a few years now on the people analytics technology study. And as I read your reports on employee experience and people analytics tech, it's starting to look more similar than different, in my view, anyway. Particularly with Viva, just pointedly has as one of its 4 pillars, insights. And what I am excited about is that its value proposition is not only to executives, it's not only to managers, it's to the individuals themselves. Yep. Which is a long time in coming, because they're generating the data, and what's in it for them, even if they're consciously providing data via Glint, for example, or if it's just data exhaust, that is captured by workplace analytics, which I guess is going to be Viva Insights. So, what are your thoughts about the potential melding, in Medallia is another example, as are Qualtrics and sort of on down the line, yep, of people analytics technologies and employee experience technologies?
Well, I think one point, Insights is both workplace analytics and Glint. So I think that's important to call out.
Right.
But I think it is a natural coming together. Mm-hmm. Because I think that we can continue to have a tool, a mechanism to measure things, but if we are able to have that measurement integrated into the platform, I think we will be better able to understand overall what's happening. So if we're really trying to use employee experience technology to understand the employee experience, which it seems obvious, then it seems like we should be having the analytical capabilities baked in. So yeah. I think it's a good move. That said, we should always be hesitant about the combination of really big things and complex things together, because when it comes to development dollars, innovation dollars, is it going to go to the front end, which is important, in what employees are experiencing, or is it going to go to the back end for the analytics and the understanding, which we know to be important, but touches a fewer number of people? And so while I think in general this combination is a good thing, there are certainly plenty of risks that come along with it that we need to be aware of.
I think you're spot on and very well said, because I have been wrestling in my mind a bit, is this the kind of sunsetting of people analytics technologies as a discrete offering with a discrete value proposition. And my current thinking is that it's not. There's still room in the world for the likes of Vizier and One Model and Cruncher and those who are now partnering with the likes of Medallia and others. Medallia, correct me if I'm wrong, in your language that you just used, kind of the front end experience platform, whereas Vizier would be the more analytics platform with the more concise executive audience. Is that what you're thinking as well, at least for the foreseeable future, that people analytics will remain a discrete discipline within likely HR, whereas employee experience will be broader and might include IT and potentially facilities and others?
Yeah, I think employee experience already is broader, right?
Yeah.
And so I do think that that's the case. And look, not everyone's a Microsoft customer.
Yeah.
Even if you are a O365 customer, that doesn't mean therefore you are a customer of all these other things, or that you want to. I mean, as attractive as the value proposition is of this all being together, and that's what I wrote about in my blog, that doesn't mean that's the right answer for everyone. And each of these individual components, whether it is workplace analytics, Glint, or some of the other elements within like the learning and the connections, they're going to still have to compete against other products within their space.
Yeah.
Now, the integration factor, yes, that's a strong selling point, but it's not the only one. And we have seen how many technologies who have said, okay, we're going to stitch together, just to take an example, performance management and succession and learning and all the rest of this. And then we looked at it and we said, well, that's kind of a Frankenstein. I mean, that's kind of how it's often been. So there will be a real onus on Microsoft to make this work together and to work together well. And as I highlighted in the blog, these are many of them are a bunch of acquisitions. They may not already be they're unlikely to be on common data structures. I'm sure they were built on different platforms. Like, there's a lot to go on here. And so even though it's all under the Microsoft banner, doesn't necessarily mean that they all play nicely together. They may, but we don't know that. So it's important to, I think, be aware that they're still going to have to compete individually. They're still going to have to integrate well. And those are pretty big challenges.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that brings up for me, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this, is that I am cautious and I don't want organizations to take a technology first approach to say, okay, we're going to do employee experience and go buy something. I believe there needs to be a mental model. I think there needs to be a governance structure. I often said, and I said it earlier today, first who, then what. It's cliche, but I believe it to be true. When we talk about employee experience, it involves IT, facilities, legal, HR, of course, so on down the line. And many haven't coalesced these governance bodies that are actually touching people in various ways, particularly as we talked about return to work policies emerging in the wake of COVID. So, what are your thoughts about the need for organizations to have a very intentional approach to employee experience that's defined around a mental model and a way to make decisions? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think, said my entire career that a clear strategy connected to your overall business strategy and with a clear sense of the resulting practices is step one. That has to drive all the other decisions, because and I've seen it play out, because if you would, if one were to have allowed the vendors to kind of drive the practices or processes of, let's say, performance management, we'd all still be forever stuck in the world of, just the 5-point scale and 9 boxes for everyone and all the rest of that. But all the innovation has come because leaders have said, wait, let's step back. Let's think about what we're trying to achieve, what people actually need to be successful, and then what the practices should be for this organization to make them successful. Okay, we know that. Now let's go find tech. And if there's not tech out there, either we're going to work with some of the new startup vendors who are kind of looking to find a niche and see if they'll build something for us, or we'll build it in-house. But that is a lot of how the innovation happens in our space. But more importantly, that's how we make sure that we're serving our people in our organizations the best.
Yeah, and when you talk about serving people within the organization, the topic that has been discussed repeatedly today is the identification and prioritization of personas, and potentially using design thinking approaches to create experiences that are very intentional and that are supported by processes and technology. What are your thoughts, number one, around that approach? And the follow-on question is, who needs to be involved in doing that work? Is it inside HR? Is it outside of HR? What is the role of HR in your view?
Yeah, I think that whatever we do, we have to put employees at the center. And so the beauty of something like design thinking is that's exactly what it does. And so I think that a lot of the work around that with journey maps and personas and the like is very good. And I would never want to discourage someone from doing that work. That said, when we did our study of and have great practices in people analytics last year, where we ended up writing that 5 pillars article and the responsive organization article. What we found was that was good, but not necessarily great. And what is great is that in combination with using data in a much broader or a much more detailed sense, of what people actually need. And so I think that it's very easy to be like, okay, well, we have a general sense of this type of persona and this type of persona and that type of persona. But, particularly in some really more sophisticated organizations like ABM AMRO comes to mind with Patrick Hulen over there. They're able to pull in data and augment those personas and kind of advance them to the next level of understanding of what those people need, and then build off of that. So I think that is, don't just stop at personas and journey maps and design thinking. So that's the first answer. Second answer is, I think you got to bring in a lot of people. Yes, it's HR, it's people analytics, it's leaders in the business, it's your everyday employee who's using whatever technology. And they're not necessarily they shouldn't all be decision makers, but they should all, I think, be involved in the process of what do we need as an organization. And then it's incumbent on HR to go out and find a technology and to bring in the right people to have that to make the final decision. But bringing those folks in earlier, it can't be in an HR vacuum. It has to be broader than that.
Yeah, and I support that certainly, and I'm also exploring in my head as more organizations make this a priority. I draw a potential analogy to diversity, equity, and inclusion and how that's evolved over the years. So, this past year, it's been elevated priorities, more resources. It's front and center in terms of how talent strategies are formulated. Everything from learning, internal movement, hiring, of course. And so employee experience is coming to the fore, and it's certainly related. And it's also the case that there are people who are holding titles of employee experience. Some are just one person shops, and they're under-resourced and it's hard to get things done. In other organizations, it's initiative and it's someone's part-time job and it doesn't really take hold. So in terms of really making this come to life, do you see a role for third parties, whether it be consultants or historical system integrators, to actually facilitate the process and take it over the finish line and embed it into processes within the organization? I mean, I'm not saying that in any other way than just acknowledging reality. It's that everyone has their part-time job or their full-time job rather, and if there's not focus applied, it's just not going to get done. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think bringing in outside help, it's the classic, are you going to build the help? Are you going to buy it? Are you going to borrow it? I mean, just get it,
Just
however
get it.
you need to
Yeah.
get it. But I think, what you have to be careful of course, is just making sure that the broader organization has a chance to weigh in. Not that it's their full-time job, but that you are bringing in that diversity of perspectives within the organization, particularly if you bring someone in from the outside, because there may be cultural elements they don't understand, there may be legacy issues that they necessarily don't have the context for, etc. So you just need to make sure that you're supporting whoever you bring in with that information. But I mean, get it done however you need to get it done.
Yeah, so let's say we bring somebody in and they're facilitating, and we have that diverse group in place. So we have HR and facilities and real estate and legal and IT and all these folks. There is discussion, that some of which we had today, that employee experience at the end of the day is not going to be owned by HR, that is going to be facilitated or stewarded by HR, and that the budget potentially for employee experience technologies might actually come out of IT or digital transformation or something like that, because it's not necessarily an HR technology, it's a workforce or people technology. Thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's increasingly the case in our space. I think we've had and much of it related to the fact that we've had specific HR talent processes that HR's own. Therefore, it made sense that HR owned the budget. But as we continue to, as we should, push talent practices into the organization, enable managers, enable employees to do more things from kind of a talent management perspective, it makes sense that it wouldn't necessarily all be held within HR. So I'm hearing of a lot more vendors who are getting traction with the business, and then with the business are going to HR and saying, we need this technology, whatever it happens to be. So I think that's a shift. The other thing is, a lot of the thinking around EX comes from CX. And so what I'm seeing, particularly with vendors who were traditionally CX vendors and have moved into the EX space, is a lot of their customers are actually the business, because they had them for CX and they said, oh, this makes sense for us to do for our employees. Let's bring it over. And then, a reasonable percentage of the time, HR is not involved, and it's the business who's buying it, particularly in those instances. So I think this is, as we continue, to your point earlier, to push more capability and technologies to employees broadly, the ownership of the budget is necessarily going to shift as well.
Yeah, so I had the pleasure of talking with people on the leader yesterday of a large company, and they are involved, as many organizations are, in identifying what the future of work is going to be for them. What disruptions are going to occur, again, return to workplace, all these things. And there is, budget going to those types of initiatives, particularly in larger institutions. Now, arguably, employee experience has a role to play in that discussion, and not only in the wake of said discussions, but actually contributing to it, because it would bring not only current state analysis, but identify, potentially what could be done in a future state, given the set of technologies that are in place. So do you see, as we fast forward over time, next 6, 12, months, that there's going to be more planfulness in crafting and more intention around crafting employee experiences? Or do you think that's just wishful thinking, and this is kind of a fad that's going to come and go, and we're going to be calling it something different, in 12, 24 months? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I won't say we won't be calling it something different, because it seems like that's HR's forte. We seem to always rename stuff. But no, all joking aside, I think we are on the edge of what could be either a really good experience, or
I thought you said we're on the edge of glory. That tells me my daughter has an influence on me. I'll just we'll cut this out of the recording.
No, we're on the edge of something that could be really great, or could be, quite frankly, a bit of a disaster. And what I mean is, we're going to start to bring people back to work, And there's going to be all sorts of questions about equity and fairness. Who comes back first? How do you understand? Is it people who have had vaccines? What does our workplace look like? How does that look different? If we're now going to have to divide people into spaces because of potential still future COVID risk, who gets the offices? Who gets this? I mean, we are and then you extrapolate out. Okay, so we're going to have a meeting. Who has to be there in person? How are we going to handle the tech, which we never did very well with remote people participate? I mean, like. Being everyone at home has been a great leveler. Yeah. Going back in what will have to be groups is potentially the great divider. Yeah. And so I hope and pray, literally, like for our society, that people are far more planful than we've ever been about what employee experience looks and feels like, and the equity sides of it. Because if we're not, I think it can tear our organizations apart. So I think it's incumbent on everyone to push our organizations to think this through. What are the consequences? What are the unintended consequences of some of the decisions we're making with regard to particularly return to work in the employee experience context? Now, fast forward a year from now, maybe we're all back in the workplace or in our offices if that's what your organization decides. At that point, will we continue to be more planful? My hope, again, is that as a result of this exercise, we will be. I think that if nothing else, COVID has helped people being senior leaders understand the importance of data in understanding what's happening with their people and therefore the importance of their people. So I am hopeful. I am optimistic. If nothing else, because I think the alternative is so bad.
Yeah. And I would emphasize too, not only on the diversity, equity, and inclusion side, it's the ability, once the economy starts to turn around in the wake of this pandemic, is that high value talent, if they're not having a positive experience where they can manage their well-being, they're going to have options and they're going to have places to go. So I think there's a huge risk that you're highlighting of not taking this seriously. If I'm listening to you specifically, it's like, this is great. We got to do this. There's no question. Okay. The technologies are there. They enable this now. They're going to continue to mature. So why aren't organizations going to be doing this? Let's say 5,000 or more people, they have critical mass on every criteria. They're checking, okay, this should be done. Yet, as you and I both know, in all likelihood, the majority are just going to keep plowing through. They're going to see this as an HR initiative that they're not going to fund, at least to a significant extent. So what would actually increase the uptake of organizations adopting an employee experience approach and doing it effectively? Because correct me if I'm wrong, the technologies are there. It's really about the internal processes. So what has to shift for the internal process and the people who are leading the organization to actually adopt this approach? What do you think?
I think it depends on the extent to which these leaders have understood the value of their people during this time, and are open to and can see what a different future looks like. Mm-hmm. Because I think it's easy, or maybe easier, to say, okay, like we held it together with duct tape and glue over the course of this year that we were at home, or however long it's going to be, but we all just want normalcy. We all just want to go back to how it was. Yeah. And so we're just going to do that because that's what we know what it looks like. We don't know what it looks like to kind of live that, like I said, some people remote, some people not life. And so I think that it's incumbent on us in the space to say, this is what it could be. Here's how we could be leveraging the strengths of the experience that we all just had to actually make our workplaces better, whether that's from a perspective of people being, potentially more productive, particularly once their children go back to school. Certainly from a DEIB perspective in terms of flexibility for different people. And that's not just a woman thing, that is a family's thing. So I think, another one being enabling more people to participate. We've enabled our digital experiences better, more people being a part of the process, being able to participate in different ways. I think that there are all sorts of ways that we can show significant business benefits, and it's incumbent on us to show that before the decisions get made for everyone to go back. If we don't, I think people revert to what they know, and they're going to revert to what was before.
Yeah, and that's my, frankly, fear, that there's a lot of inertia, and I thought in being in evidence-based decision making, you just lay out the insight and the whole world will just, oh gosh, then we got to change, and that hasn't happened. So if I'm a CEO, and it's a similar question, but it's different.
Well, you are. It says in your title.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. This is a massive company. Can you say, okay, this is just another, gimmicky flavor of the month HR initiative. What would you say beyond what you just shared? It's, for me, when we talk about the future of work, digital transformation, all these things that have been going on around the organization, in some cases for quite some time, this, as far as it relates to workers, is a kind of a cohesive framing to make sure that we are delivering on the promise of the culture that we want. As an example, what would you say to those who are cynical about this? It might not even be a CEO; it could be a CHRO or somebody who's like, oh gosh, I don't want the market or Microsoft or anybody else to dictate how I'm going to go after my culture and work on productivity and inclusion, all these other things. What would you say?
I guess first I would say you need to do what's right for your company and your people. Mm-hmm. For instance, I talk to everyone. Like, I don't have a point of view on, I have a point of view on what some people do best for some things, but there's all sorts of different approaches for everyone. And so it's important to do that, but to do what's right for your organization, your business, and your people. But remember that what's right for your people is unlikely to be what was right for them in January 2020. And you run a risk of, if you don't adequately take into account what your people need, of a significant exodus. Once the fear goes, once to some extent just the pure gratitude for having a job during this time goes. If you aren't seen as looking out for your people, for being aware, for being responsive to what's happened, they're going to find someone who is.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's incumbent upon both you and me to start, actually we're doing what we can, but even more so to emphasize the critical nature of this work. Of all the things, I would put diversity, equity, inclusion in a similar kind of urgency category, if you will. And there are maybe a handful of other themes that are, well-being being another. But employee experience arguably is kind of the umbrella that brings it all together. And I couldn't agree more that the risks of not taking a more systematic approach could be dire, particularly when the market shifts.
But I think Al, the good news is, I think there are not going to be as many senior leaders, non-HR senior leaders, who have this perspective as we might fear. I think that we have been through such a fundamental reshifting and reshaping of life experience. I mean, when you and I are 90, we're going to be talking about like this crazy time. Like I think it's 60, like our depression,
in 60 years or so. 60,
in 60 years, exactly.
65 years.
Yeah. I'm just out of college, right?
I know that, and you're doing exceptionally well. You keep it up. High performer times 10.
But this is a foundational time we've been through, and I've said this a number of times which is that I think in some ways the openness we've seen with senior executives towards diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging was fostered and was a result of what had just happened with COVID. So if you think back to, last March, April, May, was, a lot of executives having to show some vulnerability. We don't know the answers. We've never done this. This is hard. This is hard for everyone. That type of language. And then, follow that up with the social justice movement start really kicking off, in June, with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And you saw them saying a lot of the same things. This is hard. We didn't know. We didn't understand. We need to understand. Let's have these conversations. And I have a sense that potentially as we return to work, we're going to hopefully hear some of that. We're going to work through what this looks like. We don't have the answer. We're going to try some things, and it's okay if we don't have the answers, because look, it's been okay that we didn't have the answers for the last 18 months at that point. Yeah. So I'm hopeful for this moment.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter, and the pursuit of social justice and greater equity and fairness has created space that formerly we didn't have. And there's been an element of pause, and there's reflection, and in some cases leadership has actually changed. So yeah, I think this is a great opportunity. I just hope a significant number of leaders take advantage of the opportunity, and they can't say the technology is not there. It's now a matter of prioritization and making it real. So yeah.
Well, and I think we've proven that it's not a false choice. It used to be that there was perceived to be a choice between we can offer our people flexibility or we can be a successful business. And we've shown that is not the case. Yep. And I think there are plenty of other false choices that people thought were having to be made in pursuit of, greater performance and the like. And I don't think that's true. And I think, and I'm hopeful again that people will recognize that.
Yeah, your insights and perspectives and ideas are world-class and valuable, and I just super appreciate you for sharing. As we start to wrap up, I want to make sure if anybody in the audience wants to share a question or two before we wrap, please do so. Put it in the feed. You can actually raise your hand too, and we can call on you if you want to share it directly. But I have a couple things that I want to ask you. Well, first off, you have some other slides. Is there anything that you want to toss up that, in no pressure, I just want to offer it up?
No, I think we've covered it. Okay. We've since we last talked, we've released a diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging tech report. So if anybody is interested in that, we also have a free tool on our site that people can go and kind of see the different technologies available in the different talent life cycles. So I think that, if that's of interest to folks, that's out there. You mentioned the People Analytics Tech Report, which I believe is on your website. Yeah. The full thing is. Yeah. So people can access that as well. But we're hopeful that by sharing this information, people will become better informed of the options that are out there to enable them to achieve those strategies.
And we'll talk about a little bit about your new model, your membership model, and what you have going on, and make sure you get a chance to trumpet your great work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, the team's great work. So we launched a research membership back in December. We are actually concluding introductory pricing on Monday. So if anybody here is interested,
got the
email. And so the reason for that, so before this, our research was primarily sponsored by folks like PAFOW, and we made it available for free, which has been a great way to do the work. What we wanted to do, though, is there are some topics that are maybe just a little bit farther out, kind of on the future edge of things that we think are coming, but we couldn't necessarily find a sponsor to get to, or some tools that maybe we couldn't find a sponsor for. And so we wanted to just be able to broaden our offering and our capability. And so through the research membership, that just gives us a way to do that much more effectively. So we launched it. And we're looking also to build a number of things new into it, like a whole bunch more data tools. We've got the vendor tools right now. We're going to put a bunch more data tools up there, and really just try and, our thing is about trying to just drive better insights, better data-backed insights into our community so that we can use it to make work better.
Yeah, well, I love what you're doing. Almost needless to say, but I'll keep saying it. And I wish you all the best. And of course, we're here to support you. And just to emphasize what you're saying, I think there's a great opportunity for members to support research that's going to benefit them, to effectively be the voice of the worker or employee or whatever you want to call it, to offset the vendor-supported research. So I wish you all the success in making that happen. As we wrap, your website and what do you have coming down the pipe?
Yeah, so we are at www.redthreadresearch.com. And what we have coming, we have a brand new mobility report that is coming on next Tuesday. This week, we published a really cool competencies versus skills study that we spent quite a bit of work on. It's called Competencies and Skills. What's the deal? So I kind of love that one. And then next week's, the career mobility report was, again, a really long-term effort. And that one is career mobility, mindset, not movement. That's what we called it. And so we talk about how that's just this big shift in terms of how we're thinking about mobility in the workplace. So those are the most immediate things coming up. We're going to be doing a study on DEIB and analytics, which is coming. We're likely going to do one on the skills for DEIB, what we need in the workplace. And we have an overarching theme of skills this year. So skills in all sorts of different contexts, because we feel like it's a really hot term, but not a lot of concrete, this is how you should think about it, this is what people are actually doing. So that's a big focus for us.
Well, I mean, do you sleep? Does your team sleep? Does anyone sleep over there? And you got a few kids running around behind you too. So I mean, it's incredible what you're able to do. And so,
thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you for contributing in the way that you and your team do to the community. It's hugely valuable. So you keep it up, and hope to see you before too long. I mean, you're right there, but it's like this.
I know we're so far apart and so close.
So far.
Yeah.
All right, Stacia. Well, you be
Thank
well,
you.
And get some good rest. Appreciate you.
Thank you. You too. All right. Take care, Al.
All right. Bye.